Football at 4. John McMullen talks NFL with us as the draft is coming. Now, Jeff and I were talking about a half an hour ago about John's mock draft. Jerry Tillery, that's who you, Jeff, had in your mock draft as well?
My first one, yeah, I had him as the first of their 2 second-round picks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
First of their 2 second-round picks, which would beg the question, could they use those 2 second-round picks and their first-round pick to take a big jump? Now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday with John. Is there a guy that you think that they would target to move up to go get? Because they have ammunition.
No, I don't think they want to move up. Unless a guy that's really special, like a top 10. I don't think they have a target, but if a top 10 guy, and they did this with Macklin in 2009, falls to within a spot or two of where they pick, and they feel he's that special, they're going to want. I could see them, but I think theoretically they would like to either stay or add picks, not give up picks.
John McMullen, 97.3, ESPN.com. The draft is coming. It's about 15 days away now. It'll be 2 Thursdays from now. We'll be live at the Wonder Bar. And today, if you have the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, you got today's Sports Bash draft party keyword, and many of you have texted that keyword to us. So good job by you. If you don't have the app, get it in the Apple Store or Google Play. By the way, my phone last night did one of those restarts. Like it redid everything.
Yeah,
like
upgrade
the whole operating system.
Yeah,
I hate it. Don't you hate that when
everybody
it does
hates for the first 3 days? Everybody hates the upgrade.
God, it's why? Like it just did it in the middle of the night last night. Turned off, redid, and I woke up this morning. I said, "What the heck is up with my phone?"
Would you rather have it happen at 3:00 in the afternoon? I mean, it's better that it happened.
No,
in the middle
but
of the
I
night.
woke up and I was like, my phone is completely different now. I don't like it at all. I got to get used to it.
You'll get used to it.
All right, let's bring John in and talk some draft, talk some NFL with him. And, John, do you think they have, number one, with pick 25 and 2 second-round picks, how far up could they go?
Well, I agree with Jeff. I don't think they want to go up because, remember, I kind of said earlier in the week, you have to realize they're coming off the Carson Wentz trade, and they've had a lack of draft picks for the past 2 seasons. So I don't think they want to move up. I think they're happy this is the first year back where they have at least an acceptable number of picks, and if anything, they'd prefer to add to that. There's always a chance, though, if somebody falls that they like. And if you look at the top 30 visits, I was trying to compile them today. I'm at 27, I think. I don't know if Jeff has a different number, but from the people they brought in, Ed Oliver, Montez Sweat, Juwan Taylor would be the 3 guys that I saw that there's no way they're going to be there at 25. So that might be a little sort of view into the prism of guys they really like, that if they started to fall maybe to 20, 21, I don't see there's any way that happens with Taylor or Sweat. Perhaps if Oliver gets by the Raiders at 4, he might fall a little bit, but I think it's far more likely that they trade down than trade up.
Yeah, and John just hit it on the head. I was thinking of 2 guys, John, who might theoretically fall, and just theoretically, and that would be either Montez Sweat or Ed Oliver, that I could see the Eagles going 1 or 2 spots for. But given how old they are, and we've talked about that a lot, and this year and next year with their compensatory picks and their formula of what they're getting, I mean, these are the 2 years that they're really going to have to use, especially while Carson is still not being paid a lot yet, to get this roster younger and get the draft and development process going on. So I would agree. It would have to be someone really special and probably one of those 2 guys. And even that, it's a deep defensive line class. So they might even think, even if those 2 guys were nearing, there may be some defensive linemen that they already have rated fairly high anyway who are still around.
Yeah, and we've been talking about defensive line for a long time, since Howie Roseman basically called it historic, the defensive line talent, and he's not the only one. Mm-hmm. Everybody, GM, personnel guys, seems to agree this is one of the best defensive line drafts ever. So I think the assumption is somebody's going to fall there. I had Tillery going. And he's rising up the board. I know you had him, I think you said, in the 2nd round.
Yeah, that was like 4 weeks ago at 1.0.
Yeah, it's sort of like media people catch up to what NFL people think, and
Yeah.
he's going to go in the first round. So it's interesting. The Eagles haven't brought him in, but when I always look at this top 30 visits, the one area where you don't want to sort of indicate any interest could be in the first round. And you want to hide the fact that you like a particular player. I don't know if that's what's going on with the Eagles. Otherwise, I see some clear themes in the fact that they're looking at a lot of defensive linemen, a lot of offensive linemen, some receivers, running backs. You can see that fourth round. I think that's the sweet spot for the running backs. I think the Eagles are kind of hoping Darrell Henderson or Miles Sanders, somebody like that, falls to day 3 in the fourth round, and they can get a value pick there. And why a receiver is the most interesting one, which I think indicates, again, that Nelson Aguilar remains on that trading block.
That's an interesting point. You know, you mentioned Nelson Aguilar, but if Howie has some ammunition on draft day to do anything or do something, are there other players on draft day that maybe should be sitting near the couch in case they get a call that says, hey, you've just been moved?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Just off the top of my head, Aguilar would be certainly the most likely to move. I don't think there's anybody else that you would say they definitely don't want him back and they're moving in a different direction. That could change depending on what happens in the draft, though. If you get a player, say everybody's gone at 25, they can't move down, they take a Chris Lindstrom at an offensive guard, well, you want to get him in the lineup, I would think. Mm-hmm. So maybe that makes Isaac Seumalo or somebody like that trade bait, but I don't see any obvious ones.
How about Jalen Mills? I mean, if they think that they've got something
with Schwartz loves him.
I do too. I do, but you got to figure out what you're going to do with Ronald Darby and Sidney Jones at some point, and especially with Maddox playing well. If someone, here's the thing, John, I'll ask you this. You know Howie. He likes to provide Schwartz with players he likes, but Howie is also the one that pulls the trigger. And if there's a good deal to make, Howie will make it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not that he's going to listen to Jim Schwartz at all costs. If he feels it's going to improve the team, he's going to pull the trigger. I think you got a clear indication with the Golden Tate trade from that. I don't think necessarily the coaching staff wanted Golden Tate, but they made the deal anyway. So you make a good point there. But at the cornerback position, you can never be too deep in this league. I know everyone says 6 corners, and that's too many. I don't think it is too many. You see what happened last year. Certainly, Darby's going to be a part of that. I think the fan base has way more confidence in Rasul Douglas than the coaching staff.
That's a good name to bring up. You know, somebody might view him as a decent safety, and we're talking day 2 or day 3 of the draft here, right? And maybe there's a way to maneuver by getting rid of Rasul.
Yeah, that's potential. But I do think, and when I say I don't think they think as highly as him, that's as a potential starter. I think they like him as a backup, and you need significant depth. I think they understand what he is and that he's a zone corner and you have to scheme around him. I don't think Cre'Von LeBlanc, as well as he played down the stretch last season, I don't think you can count on him.
Right.
So I think in some ways the depth is overestimated a little bit. And I'm not necessarily saying they're going to move a corner because they have too many corners. that doesn't exist in this league. I brought up to Mike earlier in the week, look at what the Vikings did with Mike Hughes last year. They had Xavier Rhodes, number 1 pick. Trey Wayans, number 1 pick. Mackenzie Alexander, second-round pick. They had Terrence Newman was still there. It was ageless and continued to play at a high level. And they still took Mike Hughes in the first round. And guess what? Everybody got hurt, and they didn't have cornerbacks in the middle of the season. In the modern NFL, you can never have enough corners, and I think that's how the Eagles are looking at it.
Yeah, and one thing, too, just to kind of, let's say, is there a guy that's their Jordan Matthews for a Ronald Darby deal? Because that's something that post-draft, that after the dust settles, is there a guy that, okay, I'm safe on draft day, but maybe I'm not safe post-draft?
Well, I think everyone, and Jeff brought up Jalen Mills. A lot of people said, why don't you trade Jalen Mills for Duke Johnson? And the Eagles still need a sort of receiving compliment to Jordan Howard in the backfield. That makes sense, but then you start thinking about it. Well, nobody in Philadelphia likes Jalen except Jim Schwartz. At least it seems that way. So what's your assumption that Cleveland would want to like him? Number one.
That's always the problem, right? The guy that you don't want, neither does anybody else.
Oh, exactly. But I think the Eagles do want him. That's the other point. I think the Eagles like him. I think they love his competitiveness, his run support. And, he's not the greatest press coverage corner in the world, but he plays a lot. And I think people looked at the way, and that's why I brought up Rasul, and there's a lot of Rasul Douglas truthers amongst the Eagles fan base. And they assume because he had some high moments at the end of last season that can project to a lot of snaps and a lot of repetitions. And I think he's the kind of guy, the more he plays, the more he gets exposed. And I think the Eagles coaching staff understands that.
Talking with John McMullen, the draft is on the way. And, the one thing – you talk about this a lot, John, when the quarterback comes into play and he starts pushing guys down, right? I mean, you start to see quarterbacks who don't belong in that spot in the draft. It pushes guys down. That would seemingly mean that if that happens this year, and I don't know that it will, but it seems that a lot of people think that could happen, that Howie would have a very interesting decision to make at 25 if people keep getting pushed down. And we touched on this a little bit yesterday, like if Josh Jacobs is there and if there's multiple guys he likes at 25, is it at that point that Howie pulls the trigger and gets out of that spot? If you start to see quarterbacks going ahead of 25, does that mean Howie's on the phone saying, how do I get out of this spot?
Yeah, well, and that's the point. If you're sitting at 25 and there's, say, 3 players you really like and you can drop 2 spots and pick up something extra, you probably want to do that unless there's a clear demarcation line between those 3 players. But if they're all similarly rated by the Eagles, then, that's exactly when he moved down. Now, it always takes 2 to tango. Everybody wants to move down. Everybody wants more picks. It's generally the teams that want quarterbacks that are trying to trade up and trying to overvalue and things of that nature. So it's not as easy as just saying, okay, we're going to trade down here. You also have to find somebody that wants to come up, and there's a reason for that. So it's a little more difficult, but as both Jeff and I stated, this team is much more likely to trade down than trade up simply because they haven't had a lot of draft picks in the past 2 years, and it's not just about 2019. You always have to have in the back of your mind the budget, and Carson Wentz and the extension is coming. And at some point, you have to build a little bit differently when it does come. And by build differently, I mean some of your depth has got to come from draft picks. You're not going to be able to get as many veteran players when you got to pay the quarterback perhaps $30 million from an annual value.
You know, John, Mike asked me a good question before. He said, what if at 25, the 2 highest rated players on the board for the Eagles are running back and safety? And it almost brings up a really interesting conversation because it's the 2 positions that you could say the Eagles have ignored in the draft largely for the past few years, at least high in the draft, and just have an absolute need for. And then it comes down to me, my response was, well, what do they think they can get in the second round from a value standpoint? And it seems like this draft has good both, probably more safety though, at least early first and second rounds between, the kid from Florida, you got the Juan Thornhill, you got the Alabama kid, you got the Washington kid. There's about 5 or 6 safeties there who are going to be available in the first or second round. It's a good year to need a safety, probably maybe more so than if you need a running back.
Yeah, I was certainly than a running back where it's kind of Josh Jacobs and nobody else, at least for the potential at 25. But then I go back to those top 30 visits, and you start looking about who are you hoping falls a little bit in the second round. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a host of players they brought in that could fit in that category. Most of them are in the defensive backfield, a couple of receivers as well. Mm-hmm. You have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the D-back from Florida. Now, he's a guy I'd put an asterisk on because he's so versatile.
Yeah, I like him a lot.
Yeah, and Jim Schwartz preaches versatility on the back end, and he can play so many different positions. He can play slot corner. He can play either safety. And then Thornhill, I think you mentioned from Virginia, and DeAndre Baker, the corner. I think those are three guys in the defensive backfield you can see they hope fall. And then Parris Campbell, the wide receiver from Ohio State, Titus Howard, who I think will be there in the second round, and Jeff Stoutland seems to love. Mm-hmm. He's another perhaps indication of where they want to go. But, yeah, you look for themes and positions, and safety is certainly a theme that they've been looking at. And Gardner-Johnson's the one guy who I said, that kind of – he strikes me as an Eagle. He strikes me as a Jim Schwartz type.
Yeah, I had Titus Howard and Chauncey Gardner going 53rd and 57. It may actually wind up being flip-flopped, whoever knows, but in my latest mock, in my 2.0.
Yeah, well, those are two good names because those are clearly names they're hoping fall to me in the second round. So I like your thinking there. I certainly have those names in the hopper as potential options in the second round. Question is, do they get there? I certainly think Howard's going to get there. I'm not as confident with Gardner-Johnson. I think potentially he could be picked higher than that.
Yeah, and the Eagles have those two picks in the second round. Is this a good year to have multiple second-round picks?
Well, it's always good. I mean, you should be able to add talent, and there's going to be good players there, whether you get your first choice or not. And you should be able – I think it's pretty evident the Eagles are going to be looking for a safety or a receiver or an offensive lineman. A lot depends at 25. The assumption is it's going to be defensive line. That's my assumption simply because there's so many bodies, and somebody's going to fall. Somebody's going to fall that they like. Jalen Ferguson, he's a guy that had in Louisiana Tech, not as well known as other players, but he's an edge rusher. He's a guy who's sort of getting a lot of interest around the league, and I think NFL scouts probably like a little bit more than media types, and people are catching up to that. He's another guy you should put in the hopper at 25.
All right, we got more draft talk leading into April 25th. John McMullen, all the NFL news notes. Yesterday we had David Sills on the show, and he's a very interesting young man, a wide receiver. And he's probably
they got to take somebody from.
I asked him about that. He's very well aware of the pipeline here, and he said he grew up cheering for the Eagles, and he said, I remember going to games doing the EAGLES. So I would ask you, is wide receiver on their list? Would David Sills, maybe not particularly Sills, but I like Sills. I know he'll get a lot of probably Thielen comparisons, but he's an interesting guy because he doesn't have a lot of experience playing that position, but he could be one of those guys that doesn't have the experience and ends up being picked in like the 4th or 5th round and then blossoming.
Yeah, I definitely think receivers in the mix. As I said, A.J. Brown has been in, Parris Campbell's been in, Harry, the kid from Arizona State, has been in. So they're still looking at wide receiver, and I think that indicates two things. I mentioned Aguilar potentially being on the move. And then the second part is Deshaun Jackson's not young. I mean, that's a short-term fix. So, again, it's about more than 2019. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if receiver is one of those top three choices.
Huh.
First,
they ready to move on from Shelton Gibson?
I am.
We got to replace one West Virginia guy with the other.
I will say this about Shelton, and I think people don't put this into the equation as much as they should. No, he's not relevant as a receiver. He's not going to be relevant. But if you're going to be fifth, depending on if they keep 5 or they keep 6 at that position, if you're going to be the last guy on the roster, you have to play special teams. You have to play special teams. And that's what Shelton does well. He's a good special teams player. So he's got a leg up on that last spot because he can do it. Where somebody like Charles Johnson, who they signed, who had such success in the AAF and used to play in the NFL, and that raised people's antenna as him being a possible contributor. Well, I got news for you. He's got to contribute as a receiver because he's not going to help you in that last receiver spot. You're not keeping a guy if he can't play on special teams, and that's why Shelton has an advantage for that last spot. But if you're asking me, is he relevant as a receiver? Absolutely not.
All right, more from McMullen. Football at 4, 97.3 ESPN. Tomorrow's show, he'll be back with more NFL conversation, and we'll get you further prepared for the NFL draft. Thank you, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.